Live from the Cactus Creek at Ibri, he is the king of prime time, Ghana's undisputed entertainment laureate, and still the youngest old man in Ghana. Put your hands together, show some love for the indefatigable KSM.
The KSM Show.
We're coming to you live from the Cactus Creek. And I'm telling you, folks, today, if you have a notebook, notepad, get them. School. We're going to be studying Pan-Africanism today. I tell you, man, show some love for that, man. Anyway, you know, some time ago, I had a chance to MC a program. And the speaker was a very respected African-American preacher man. His name is Reverend Sullivan. And he said something I'll never forget. During his introductory speech, he said, "Black folks talk so much and do so little." Black folks talk so much and do so little. That's how he introduced, his speech for that day. And then again, Stevie Wonder, we all know Stevie Wonder, he came up with a song. They are spending all their time living in a pastime paradise. Forgive my voice. Me too, you. And anyway, spending all their lives living in the pastime paradise. And I have people who argue that black folks, the problem is we live in a pastime paradise. Everything we celebrate is about black folks. Oh, in the past, we built the pyramids. In the past, we did this. When you come to Ghana, we're the first to do this. We do that, So it's like, our paradise is pastime. Today, where is the role of the black man? A friend of mine said, you are claiming you build the pyramids, but now when you want to build the road, you bring the Chinese in to build the road for you. Anyway, I'm talking too much. This is all to introduce my guest. My guest is a Pan-Africanist. He's a lecturer at Legon. He came from the United States. He calls himself not an African-American, also an African. Ladies and gentlemen, you have to meet my guest. Put your hands together. Show some love for Obadele Cameron. There we go. Obadele, Akwaba. Please, have a seat, man. I just threw that in because he speaks so many African languages. But when we come back, the show will begin. Stick around, folks. We'll be right back.
The KSM Show.
Is it the luxurious rooms? Or the serene green surroundings? Is it the tempting swimming pool? Or the classy conference room? Or the cute gift shop? Maybe it's our chef's array of cooking delights. Whichever way, it's all about Cactus Creek. A most respected hotel. 055 039 5007.
The KSM Show.
We're back. And just before the introduction, I told you he speaks languages. Well, we're going to get to know a lot about him. Okay? Obadele, welcome to the show.
Yeah.
Good to have you here, man.
Good to be here.
And I like how you say yeah.
Sir.
And but we'll get to that.
We'll get to that. Yeah.
You heard my opening. What Reverend Sullivan said about black folks talking so much and doing so little. And then me talking about, yes, we do live in a pastime paradise. Is that an accurate reflection? What do you think?
Well, I think part of the problem with the statement from Reverend Sullivan is the same problem that I encounter with students at the University of Ghana. So for the last 10 years, I've taught Intro to African Studies. And, when I ask, the students there, what do they think of when they think of black people? Or what do they think of when they think of Africa? Or what do they think of? Usually they'll say, oh, I think of poverty. I think of disease. I think of corruption. I think of this. And I mentioned to them, I'm surprised that you didn't mention the personal computer, the PC, because that was invented by a black man named Dr. Mark Dean. They're like, what? What are you talking about? So I have to, show them that he owns the patents. Very recently, a Ghanaian named Dr. Thomas Mensah, who is known for his pioneering work in fiber optics. So if you're using the internet right now, you're using it thanks to a Ghanaian. But how many Ghanaians are taught this? I don't know if Reverend Sullivan is aware of this. We could talk about Patricia Bath, who invented laser phaco, which is a way of doing eye surgery using lasers. We could talk about Marie Van Britten Brown, and this is a black woman who invented the home security system. So if you install these cameras, you think that, oh, I'm doing something that white people invented, when in 1966, this is the woman who invented this independently, the very first one. Yeah, and we can go down the list. We can start talking about Louis Latimer, who invented the carbon filament for the light bulb. We can go into, Garrett A. Morgan and inventing the traffic light. So if you stop at a traffic light, you don't know who invented this traffic light. You just assume, oh, white people must invent it. So I think that the same problem that our students at UG are suffering from, that's the exact same problem that our good Reverend Sullivan is suffering from. And it's not that we don't do things, it's that when we do things, people don't know anything about what we do. So therefore, it's very difficult. There's a quote by the late historian Nana Runoko Rashidi, and he says, what we do for ourselves depends on what we think of ourselves. What we do for ourselves
depends on what we
think of ourselves. What we think of ourselves depends on what we know of ourselves, and what we know of ourselves depends on what we have been told. So if you go down that line, we haven't been told very much about ourselves.
Again.
Yeah, I think it's worth doing. Yeah. So what we do for ourselves depends on what we think of ourselves.
Okay.
What we think of ourselves depends on what we know of ourselves. And what we know of ourselves depends on what we have been told, that's to say, about ourselves. So look at us. When I have a lecture in class, I'll ask people, how many of you know Queen Victoria?
The whole class
all the hands will go up. And I'll mention, okay, well, how many of you know Sobek Neferu Ra? They have never even heard that. That's the very first female ruler on the entire planet Earth. So how are they living in the pastime paradise when they don't even know the name of the first female ruler on the planet Earth? How are they living in the pastime paradise when I ask them, do you know Shakespeare? Every hand goes up. And I ask, do you know Ptahhotep? That's the author of the first book in the history of the entire planet Earth. How are they living in a pastime paradise when they can't even mention the name of the most important writer in the history of the entire planet Earth? How are they living in a pastime paradise when they know Einstein, but they don't know Imhotep? The only student who I ever had who knew who Imhotep was says, oh, he was in the movie The Mummy. He was the one who was a killer. And you understand? Imagine if they did that with the heroes of, white people or Arabs and said, oh, Muhammad was this, or Jesus was that, or, the imaginary white man on a stick, as I call him. So, how are they living in a pastime paradise when they don't know anything about recent inventions and contributions, nor do they know anything about ancient inventions and contributions? So that means that, really they're at a situation where they don't know. And there's a quote by noted psychologist Nana Amos Wilson. He says, if you want to understand any problem, don't look at who suffers from the problem, look at who benefits from the problem.
If you want to look at any problem, don't look at who suffers from the problem, but who benefits from the problem.
Because usually that is following the money trail, the one who, initiated that problem in the first place. So if we see that we're ignorant of very ancient past contributions and very recent contributions, now we have to start thinking, well, once we don't know this, who benefits? So even here at Cactus Creek, someone will say, oh, why can't you bring in Europeans, right, to manage the place? Now imagine that.
Yeah, but they do. By the way, they do say that. You have this beautiful place and they say that.
I'm sure they do that because they don't know that black people have ever done anything. So if you don't know that you did anything in the ancient past or the recent past or even right now today, what are you going to think other than the only people who can do things are white people? And those are the same people who set up the...
Well, I'm listening to you and then I'm thinking there's a lot of ignorance.
Yes.
and the ignorance is coming from a lack of education, you know. Interestingly enough, you know, most of the stuff that I have that are pro-African and pan-African of any kind of nature, I learned when I was in the States, you know. I went to lectures from by Dr. Van Settima, you know, and the likes, you know, I can't remember the names, but what is the state of our education of black folks in general? You know, I'm talking about black people in Africa and African Americans in America. What is the state of our education? Why is there no serious attempts to create a linkage? Why is this big disconnect?
Very good. So we have to go a little bit into history. There's a very good book called Intellectual Warfare by Nana Jacob Carruthers. And in it, he talks about the Mohonk conferences. Now, these were a series of conferences, basically the educational or miseducational equivalent of the Berlin Conference, where white people came together to decide the direction of black education. And of course, black people weren't invited, very much like the Berlin Conference. So decisions are being made about you without any input from you. So with the Mohonk conferences, basically they decided as all these white people, this is after the so-called Civil War going into Reconstruction, that black people should be taught to stay in their place. They shouldn't be taught anything that would liberate them. They shouldn't be taught anything about their history, about their past, about their glory or greatness or anything that they could do. They should only be taught to stay in their place. Now, after the Mohonk conferences, there was a series of conferences. They decided to transfer that exact same miseducational system here to the continent. That was the Brutish, who some people call the British, I call the Brutish. So, you know,
Call them brutish.
the Brutish, because they're quite brutish in their methods. So, you know, this is essentially what went on. So both in the United States and then also here on the continent, that's the origin of the miseducation system in both places. So it's not surprising why those in the US, the same inventors who I'm mentioning, most people don't know about them. And then also here on the continent, the same things that I'm mentioning, most people don't know about them. But what do they know about? They know about Napoleon, but they don't know Dessalines. Who is not Jean-Jacques Dessalines? He's the one who defeated Napoleon in war. So he defeated France, which was supposed to be the best military power at the time. He defeated England, which was supposed to be the best, you know, superpower, maritime and so forth. And then also defeated the Spanish there in what's now the Dominican Republic. Now, how do you not know this general, but you know the loser? You understand? Again, that's very intentional that you know the loser, but you don't know the victor. Why? Because the victor is black. The exact same thing that I'm talking about. And again, if you're setting up a miseducation system, you know what benefit you're going to get from setting up that miseducation system, because once you do so, everyone will think that you need a white manager to manage Cactus Creek. Everyone will think that, to invent something, you need, you know, to bring white people in. Because again, you don't know very much about yourself, therefore you don't think very much about yourself. And all of that comes from not being told very much about ourselves. And therefore, if we're not doing things, then you can see the trajectory of that. But even when we do things, people don't even know about them. Think about Dr. Thomas Mensah. Why doesn't he have a statue on campus? We can get a statue of Gandhi, an itinerant racist, but we can't get a statue of Dr. Thomas Mensah, whose contributions in fiber optics are the reason why we're using the internet right now. I know a lot of your viewers are using the internet and they don't know that that fiber optic technology is coming from black people. They're doing it on a PC, but they don't know that PCs were invented by Dr. Mark Dean, who was working for IBM at the time. You know, Dr. Thomas Mensah was working for Corning at the time. So, you know, we can see black people who are working at NASA, who are doing just amazing things. I can go down a list forever.
Yeah.
There's a book called 1,000 Black Inventions. And, you know, again, it's going into all of these things, but how many people are aware of these things? It's not part of the curriculum. Why? Because it's a Cambridge curriculum. It's an Oxford curriculum. And again, you have, you know, basically this idea that people who are abused abuse other people. Now, people talk about that in terms of physical abuse, but the same thing happens with mental abuse, because the ones who are in charge of the miseducation system right now were abused by the colonial, you know, enemies who were telling them, you've never done anything, you were swinging from trees when we got here, so forth and so on. So now, when they're going to teach something, they're going to teach you about, you know, all of these random white people, and they're not going to tell you about the most important human beings ever to walk the face of the planet Earth.
Great. Show some love, man. This is awesome. But I want to put a question here.
Yeah.
So, and I was discussing this with a friend of mine who I'm going to be interviewing very soon, one of these days anyway. He said, yeah, so we're talking about all these great things, the great inventions. Okay, true. Why don't we know about them? Why didn't the people in the past who built the pyramids, who did all these great things, why didn't they pass that knowledge to the generations after them? Where was the break to the extent that we have absolutely no connection or knowledge of what we have done before, or the kind of people we've been before? What caused that disconnect?
So there are the Wadi al-Jarf, and these are papyri that were discovered, and they actually go through how the quarrying of the stones happened in order to build the pyramids. It actually goes through the process, and this is one of the primary source texts during the reign of Nana Khufu in terms of how that was done. So it actually was passed down. You have so much writing. So one of the languages that I teach at the University of Ghana is Medu-Neter. That's what most people refer to as ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. Now, how many students, graduates of University of Ghana, know how to read and write hieroglyphs? You understand? They have a classics department where they're reading Greek, where they're reading Latin. Now, the Greeks never invented a writing system. They got their writing system from classical Kemet, what they now know as ancient Egypt. The Romans never invented a writing system. That's what we're using right now, the Latin script. They got theirs coming from the Greeks. Now, ultimately, what this goes down to is that, you know, basically all of our people who are supposed to be educated are illiterate because the majority of world history was written long before there was a Greece or a Rome. However, if you can't read it, then you're not being able to access that information. There's a good book called African Alphabets by Nana Saki Mafundikwa. He's given a very popular talk online where he goes into how we invented writing many times over. So not only do we have the Medu-Neter script, and if we're living in a pastime paradise, how many average Ghanaians know that we invented Medu-Neter? How many of them have ever heard Medu-Neter before? Have they, you know, encountered the Meroitic script? I highly doubt it. Do they know about the Ge'ez script? Can they read and write all the things that were passed down in the Ge'ez writing system? How many of them know how to read Nsibidi? How many of them know how to read Vai? How many of them know how to read Nko? How many of them know how to read any of the writing systems that we've developed independently and then sometimes interrelatedly over the course of time? Now, the writing systems are there so that you can transcend time, right? So even after I pass on 2,000 years down the line, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, I can read the thoughts and ideas of those who were living at that time in terms of ideas of astronomy, in terms of ideas of architecture, in terms of ideas of mathematics, in terms of ideas of medicine. But how many of us know how to read that? The classics department, they start off talking about Socrates. They start off talking about Plato. They start off talking about Aristotle. And I even took an African philosophy course when I was here studying in 2000, 2001. It was called African Philosophy. And what did the teacher start with? Socrates, Plato, Aristotle.
How was that linked to African philosophy?
That was my big question. That's why I stopped going to class. But, you know, really, he can't teach other than what he knows. So at the end of the course, the very last class, he gave us an article by Kwame Gyekye that I had already read. So how is that going to teach me anything about African philosophy when you can go to classical Kemet to get the very first definition of a philosopher? And again, according to the text, it talks about he is one who stays awake, pondering things deeply. He is one who makes sure that he consults and that people consult him. So it actually goes into the very first definition of what a philosopher is. But how many of us have read any of those texts? Are we living in a pastime paradise? It seems like we don't know anything about pastime other than a generic thing of, we built pyramids. Have you read the Wadi al-Jarf, parchments in order to actually know how that was actually constructed and who constructed them? Again, I could go on and on about various texts on various things. The so-called Ebers Papyrus that goes into, medicine. We could go into the text on mathematics, but I don't think that we're really aware of the past time or current times, even though all of that writing is there, readily accessible for anyone who wants to be literate. So essentially, because we are illiterate, if all you know how to read is a Latin script, you are an illiterate. If all you know how to read is Greek script, Cyrillic script, then you're illiterate. If you don't know how to read the very first writing system on the history of the entire planet Earth, then you've locked yourself away from all of the knowledge that you could otherwise know.
Sure. We're going to be taking a commercial break, but when we come back, this is the angle I want to look at. All these things you've talked about. Even I sitting here, I must admit, most of the stuff is new to me, all these writing systems that they had in the past that you must be able to understand and read to really interpret what has gone on.
Exactly.
that is not available. It's not like I can go and buy Kemet Made Simple and learn
You
some.
actually can.
I
You
can.
actually can. And that's the thing. There's a problem.
I want to go into
Okay,
commercial break.
okay,
When we
okay.
come back, that's why I want to
No
start
problem.
off for everybody listening to us who are wondering, hey, so knowledgeable in so many things. How do we do it? Apart from completely destabilizing the entire educational system and bringing a new one. But let's take a commercial break. When we come back, Obadele in the house, and then Mr. Get your notebooks. We'll be right back.
The KSM Show.
Is it the luxurious rooms? Or the serene green surroundings? Is it the tempting swimming pool? Or the classy conference room? Or the cute gift shop? Maybe it's our chef's array of cooking delights. Whichever way, it's all about Cactus Creek. A most respected hotel. 055 039 5007.
Hi, my name is Angela Metal, a massage therapist at Cactus Creek. My job is simply to pamper you with the 3 R's, to relax you, to revitalize you, and to rejuvenate you. Come and let me pamper you.
055 039 5007.
Most of you are loving my jacket. Mr. Sao, I am for rough. The jacket is provided by ASEPA Essentials. So if you want some, this is the number to call.
0247 661983.
So call ASEPA and get yourself a pretty decent jacket.
The KSM Show.
We're back, and I hope you have your notepads and pens and laptops and whatever. We're making notes, man. And Obadele, you know, on one, I like that whole thing you said about, if you can say it again before I even ask my next question, who you are.
Okay, what you do for yourself depends on what you think of yourself. What you think of yourself depends on what you know of yourself. And what you know of yourself depends on what you have been told. And that is to say about yourself. Yes.
Okay. So here's a situation where right now, most of us have been told that we really didn't amount to nothing much, you know? And so that's what we know of ourselves. And you are coming in, not you, but there's a whole group of people who are coming in with all this new information that we should revise our thinking. You're giving us a whole list of black inventors, you know. And at some point before the commercial break, you're talking about certain writings that you need to understand, even how to read and write and interpret them. And my last question before the commercial break was, how does everyone watching me just get into that writing and read and know? Is this something that you have to take your time, go to school with, study and understand before you can even begin to understand what is going on?
So there are various books that are written by black scholars. So one is called Let the Ancestors Speak. There's another one called Mejat Wefa. So those are there. There's a proverb in Yoruba that says, "Ohun to junwa lo junri," what the eye is looking for is what the eye sees. So
What the eye is looking for
what the eye is looking
what the
for
eye
is what
sees.
the eye sees.
Okay.
So, you know, imagine if you don't even know that these things exist, and you don't even know that that's what you should be looking for in the first place. But now once you've been exposed to this type of information, now you can start looking for it. Now you can start, you know, going around. Because, you know, some of this information is accessible. You can go online and, you know, do research. You can do studies. At the University of Ghana, I had a study group for several years before it became a formal class from Medu, so people can actually, you know, learn how to read, learn how to write. Imagine all these people who've been graduating and they don't know how to read, they don't know how to write anything but the Latin script. This is, you know, basically like, you know, educational malpractice, to use a term that my father would use, because, you know, the same way you can have medical malpractice, you can have people who have gone through schooling, but they haven't gotten any education whatsoever.
Educational malpractice.
Exactly.
I like that. There's a lot of that going
Oh,
on.
by all means.
Yeah.
By all means. Yeah. So, you know, just to that exact same point, once we're able to, you know that this information is out there, now we can start doing our own research. There's a quote by Nana Carter G. Woodson who says, "People who don't study history, they lose the inspiration that comes from the study of history and biography and all those things." Essentially, it tells you what people have done, and it tells you what people can do. Specifically people who look like you, specifically your ancestors. And there's a reason why we don't get that history, why we don't get those biographies, because if we aren't inspired to know that we've done things in the past, then we're also not going to be inspired to know that we've done things right now. So again, I don't think we're living in a pastime paradise, because I can list 100 important facts about the past, and most Ghanaians, or just generally black people throughout the world, won't know anything about them. If you're living in a place, you should know something about the place that you're living. But, you know, again, because we don't know about those things, the very first mathematical instrument in the history of the world that shows evidence of knowledge of multiplication, division, prime numbers, and so forth and so on. Here we are going back tens of thousands of years, but how many Ghanaians know about any of those types of things? Again, it's not there. If you look at the first astronomical instrument in the history of the entire planet Earth, again, people have no idea, you know, what I'm even talking about. What do you mean? What do you mean? If you want to know the invention of the idea that the year has 365 days, again, you have to go to the civilizations of black people that we used to call Kemet. If we're living in a pastime paradise, we should know that. The idea that there are 24 hours in a day, again, that goes to classical Kemet. How many people know about that? The mathematical instrument I mentioned is the Congo. I could go through lists and lists and lists of things that were going on in the past. Who's living there? If you're living there, you should know about where you live, but people aren't living there, nor are they familiar with what's going on right now in terms of inventions. Every single day, contributions that are going on. Every single day, Frederick M. Jones, who invented mobile refrigeration. If you go anywhere and your juice isn't spoiled, then you need to thank Nana Frederick M. Jones, a black man who invented the mobile refrigeration unit. And, you know, again, I could go on and on and on, but yes?
Okay, let me ask you this, most like a very simple question in terms of everything that you're talking about, you know, points out to the fact that we have been a great people. So what happened? For example, let's talk about slave trade. You know, that white folks came in with ships, and then the story we have, you know, is as if we were easily conquered and the slaves were just bundled up and taken abroad. What happened? What made it so easy to conquer a people that had such a great history, a people that had such a past, glorious past? What made it so simple for slave trade to just happen?
Very good. So I think this is an excellent question, and it really goes down to the degree to which any type of animal, creature, human being, whatever, is able to identify their enemies and identify their predators and identify those who don't wish them well. If you read Anansi's story, the only creatures that are ever successful about Anansi are the ones who know that Anansi is coming in with bad mind and has bad intentions. Those are the only ones who ever survive being anywhere close to Kweku Anansi. And this is the same thing going on. If you go into Prince Henry the Navigator, he sent 2 different caravels by Nunal Tristal and Lancelot de Fretes, and he sent them out for the express purpose of capturing black people. You understand? Now, the story that most people have is, oh, we sold our brothers and sisters. No, here's a white man who's saying, I'm sending out these ships for the express purpose of capturing blacks, and they did so at Cape Verde, not the islands, but the actual Cape itself. And this was the first black man and black woman enslaved in the Western, let's say Western Eurasian enslavement process. They were taken to Portugal, and then after that they came back and they got another 200 and so forth and so on. But a lot of the issue comes from when we talk about us as a great people is that many of us don't know that we're one people. And this is the exact same thing that goes on to this day. So you have Asantes who don't like, Eves. You have Fantes who don't like Asantes. You have, Southerners who don't like Northerners. And, there's a proverb that says, when brothers fight to the death, a stranger inherits the father's estate. I'll say that again. When brothers fight to the death, it's a stranger
inherits the estate,
who inherits the father's estate. And this is what's going on. If we actually understood that we're all one people and we're all black people and we have common enemies, now we can come together on the basis of what we have in common. And that's happened at various points in time, and I can give you some examples. The very first time that happened was in classical Kemet. Now, when I say Kemet, Kemet means land of the black people. Now, if you look at where that place is located, what people now refer to as Egypt, I call it occupied Kemet, then it's right there at the threshold of where all of these non-black Eurasians are. And at that point in time, we decided to come together on the basis of what we had in common, which is that we're all black people. And that's why we named our land Kemet. That's why we call ourselves Kemetiu, which literally translates to black people. As individuals, an individual male will call himself Kim, as Hepi Kim, Hananit Kim, Sabi Kim. Women will call themselves Kemet, which translates to black woman. So all of these, let's say it's a black consciousness that happens when you know that you have a common enemy who's right there at your threshold. The same thing happened in Haiti, right? So they knew that the French were coming in. This is Napoleon's people, as we're talking about before. When they were transported there, they were calling themselves Fon. Some people were calling themselves Yoruba. Some people were calling themselves Akan. Some people were calling themselves Bakongo. But when they got there, they realized that what they had in common is they had a common enemy who was not black. So they decided to, if you read the Constitution by Nana Jean-Jacques Dessalines, that we're calling ourselves Les Noirs, the blacks. You understand? That means that we had that consciousness that we came together on the basis of what we had in common, common ancestry, common descent in order to fight off a common enemy. You see the same thing in Jamaica. We had Nana Paul Bogle who said cleave to the black, right? So when people were being shipped there, they were calling themselves, I'm Asante, I'm Fanti, I'm this, I'm that. But they realized I'm not getting cracked in the head. You're not getting raped. You're not getting lynched because you're this fragmentary identity. We all have a common, understanding that we're all black. So let's fight on the basis of being black. And that's how they were able to defeat the Brutish. And that's why the Brutish decided to lay off of the enslavement process, is because they were getting their butts whooped in Haiti, they were getting their butts whooped in Jamaica, and that's why they had to back off and morph it into the modern, quote-unquote, modern-day versions of enslavement. Same thing in the U.S. They had the Black Power movement. Now look at all the different types of people. You have a place called Igbo Landing there. You have a place called Congo Square there. That tells you where the people were coming from, but then you have a Black Power movement. How did that happen? The exact same way it happened in classical Kemet, the exact same way it happened in Haiti. And what's interesting about this is it's sort of like convergent evolution, because I doubt the people in Haiti were reading texts from classical Kemet to understand that this is why we call ourselves black people. But it's not just even limited to black people. If you look all throughout, any creature that's intelligent on the planet Earth, they come together on the basis of what they have in common. You have lions come together in prides, wolves come together in packs, right? Orcas come together in pods. So, birds come together in flocks. You understand that no matter what type of creature, every creature that wants to survive has enough intelligence to know we need to come together on the basis of what we have in common, common ancestry, common descent. However, when our miseducational system is there, we don't know that we have a common enemy. There's an interesting, and I'll let you come in, it looks like you want to come in with a question, but there was an interesting study about how amphibians, frogs, when they're in the egg, that they are smart enough to know that when a snake is approaching, they're still in the egg, they haven't even hatched yet, that they do a premature hatching and then they fall down into the river below them when they know that they have a predator around, when they know that they have an enemy around.
They can hatch the egg?
They can hatch prematurely to know to get away from a predator that's in their environment. When wasps come around and they're trying to get into the eggs, they hatch prematurely, and that's why the frogs lay them on leaves that are above the river so that they can do so and drop down into the river and they can. Now, how many black people know that white people are our enemies? I haven't met a Ghanaian who's ever said that. Every Ghanaian I've ever met says that we're our own enemies, therefore we need to fight amongst each other. Every single last one, and I've been here for 16 years now, I haven't met a single one. Now imagine a frog who says every snake, you know, I don't know that snakes are my enemies. Is that tadpole going to hatch prematurely and go into the river? Or is it going to go and stretch out its arms that it doesn't have, trying to hug and embrace a snake? Is it going to, you know, be there and try to make love with a wasp? You understand? This means that you have, you know, amphibians who are smarter than most black people right now. You understand? The ones who've been raping, enslaving, colonizing, neo-colonizing over the course of millennia, we're not smart enough to know. But again, that's intentional, because if you don't know what your enemies have done to you in the past, the same way you have to have self-knowledge, you also have to have knowledge of enemy. There was a text about war that I read at one point in time, and it says that if you have knowledge of self, but you don't have knowledge of enemy, then for every victory you gain, you will gain a defeat. If you have knowledge of the enemy, but you don't have knowledge of self, the same thing. But if you have knowledge of both yourself and your enemy, then you know you'll be undefeated. And this is essentially what's going on, is that not only do we not have knowledge of ourselves, we also don't have knowledge of enemies. So the exact same Arabs who use violence to, you know, have a conquest and take over what they now know as North Africa, we're sitting in the African Union with them, where they're still enslaving black people. Morocco, in 2016, when they were readmitted into the African Union, they had enslaved 250,000 black people. And in Morocco, they use the exact same word for a black person enslaved. They say abid. It means the exact same thing in their language. Meanwhile, we're allowing them. So if you don't know who your enemy is, then you're going to be sitting in caucus. Meanwhile, they're still enslaving you. And at the same time, you have people who are up in arms about Libya. Oh, they're enslaving black people in Libya. There's a video that's going around. I was like, Libya is a low man on the totem pole, because if you go to Sudan, where there's a war going on right now, you know, you have 500,000 black people enslaved in Sudan, 500,000 black people enslaved in what they now call Egypt, what I call occupied Kemet. If you look at tiny Tunisia, had more enslaved black people than Libya when people were doing protests at the Libyan embassy. But how many of us know that these are our enemies? No, we're holding hands with them, taking photo ops and saying, you're African and I'm African, you're not Obibini, right? But that's what happens when the conceptualization of reality happens in languages that are not your own. You can't define who you are, and you also can't define who your enemies are. And therefore, when your enemies are coming to devour you, you don't realize that you're the one who's on the plate for dinner.
Which leads me to this question, you know, and I really understand this whole issue of knowing who the enemy is. So let's go back to the time of the slave trade, when the white folks sent ships deliberately to come, invade, and catch slaves. After the first time they had done it, you go to Alamina dungeon,
Yes.
and you see where the gate called the
Door of no return.
The door of no return.
Exactly.
You know, you realize that the white folks came in, they get all these slaves, they put them through the door of no return, pack them into ships. They've done that the first time, the second time, the third time. What does it take to understand that these are enemies? You know?
Right.
So we can't continue this, you know. So that's why people start talking, because they did that in collaboration with certain Africans then, who were helping them to take away their own kith and kin. And that's why the argument that we are our own enemies, because most of us knew that these white folks were in for this, and we sort of cooperated with them. How do you react to that?
So part of the issue is what I was talking about in terms of knowledge of self is that we didn't, at the time that was happening, you mentioned collaboration of certain Africans. There wasn't a single African on the continent at that point in time. Now, why do I say that? Because the person himself, if you ask, are you an African, they'd have never even heard that word before. I'm Fanti. And not only am I Fanti, I'm from Ogwa, right? And the Ogwa people, they don't even get along from one, Asafo company to the next when they're fighting amongst each other. So this is the thing of, if you think that, no, I've got prisoners of war. Those are just some evidence that we're taking. You understand? Those are just some northerners. If you understand, look, we're all black people and all of them are our enemies. Now, some people thought, they're citing the Treaty of Boutre. They're citing, they're signing all these different treaties with various, Eurasians, the Dutch, the Danes, and so forth and so on. But they're not clear that that's not your trading partner. If there's anything that would tell you that that's not your partner, that's not your buddy, and even still today, people say, oh, that's my development partner. You understand? But meanwhile, the same ones who you thought was your partner at the Berlin Conference, did they invite you? You understand? That lets you know they understood that, what, no matter what problems we have amongst each other, those problems never supersede the problems we have with all black people. But meanwhile, we're still seeing ourselves as these fragmentary identities that we still have to this day.
Yeah, just to cut in here.
Yeah.
So during the time of the era of the slave trade, one of the things that helped facilitate it is tribalism. You're saying that we didn't see ourselves as Africans and I Ghana for we are Fantini, we
and we still do that. Because MPP, we know which ethnic group that party is for. If you just ask the common Ghanaian which ethnic group is the MPP party, it's just like a political label for the Akans. You understand? That's how most people see it. And NDC, well, that's everyone else. That's the areas, that's whoever. That, you have those exact same things that are going on, and they're doing the exact same thing now because you have these people who are fighting against those people. Meanwhile, all the bauxite is going out to the exact same white enemies. Meanwhile, all the oil is going out, and what percentage do you get in single digits out of that? Meanwhile, the diamonds are going out. Meanwhile, the gold is going out. Meanwhile, you're fighting NDC versus MPP, which is Akans versus everyone else. And what's really going on? But the exact same thing that was happening there. So we don't have to look far into the past in order to see what's going on because those exact same things, the resource just changed from human beings to now your gold. You understand? So this is the exact same thing that's going on. We're fighting amongst each other. How many black people here on the continent see blackness as their first identity? No, I'm Asante. And I'll tell you the specific house that I come from because we're fighting against those ones who are trying to take over. They want to be the next Asante Hene, but it should go to my house next and it shouldn't go to y'all. That, what's really going on, but those exact same things. But this is the reason why what people refer to as Pan-Africanism is relevant, because what that does is it helps you understand, like what happened. Every single success story we had was on the basis of us understanding we're all black people. Classical Kemet, that's our first success story. And we were able to keep them at bay for 3,000 years. You understand? These, what we refer to as Amu, these are non-black Eurasians. We kept them at bay for 3,000 years. You had text after text, for example, the prophecy of Nefertiti that was talking about the ruler who would rise up from the south and drive them out, where the Eurasians will fall to the flame, the others will fall to the sword, and then Ma'at will return to her seat while Isfet, that's chaos, is driven away. That's in the prophecy of Nefertiti. How many of our listeners have ever read the prophecy of Nefertiti? Or you can read a text called Sanhat that talks about the walls of the ruler that were created to drive out the Bedouins and to crush them. You understand? So this is a text that most people would never even know about, but it's there for them to read if they know how to read in the first place. You have, the text of Sarah Kamos. That's a historical document about the very first war of black liberation where we drove out the Hekau Hasut, what they called the Hyksos. They came in, they brought death and destruction, rape and ravage, pillage and plunder, and then we drove them out. And according to Manetho, he said that those exact same Hyksos, those invaders, those destroyers, those enslavers, they were driven out, and then they founded a town called Jerusalem. Now you got all these black people who want to say, we're the real Hebrews. Meanwhile, you're cheering on the exact same enemies who your ancestors had to defeat and drive out in the first war of black liberation. So again, we're backwards, upside down, and inside out. And we're cheering for our enemies and cheering against ourselves. This is what's going on.
That's deep, man. Show some love, man. That's deep. That's deep. I tell you what gave me some awakening when I was in the U.S. long ago. I went to see a Tarzan movie. And they have so many Tarzan series here. In this particular movie, Tarzan, as we all know, this white little baby was lost in a shipwreck. You know, so the baby was in the jungle, you know, after the shipwreck. And here is the case where, you know, watching the movie, they had these Africans, barbaric, who are looking for the baby. And then they had apes, okay, who are also looking, they're all existing in the same jungle. Now here's what scared me most. The apes were presented as almost humanly, motherly, kind to each other. The Africans were presented as barbaric. Here I was, sitting at the movie theater.
As an African.
As an African.
Exactly.
Praying that the apes should get to the baby first. Because if the African gets there, they'll kill him. Or they'll, whatever, harm the baby.
Yeah.
The apes were presented as more humane. And I, as an African sitting there, yeah, Charlie, might be before you know what I'm saying? So I can understand what you're talking about, how the whole mindset has destroyed who we are as a people and everything. And I'm not sure whether that's the state of our mind when slavery was coming in, that we welcomed them.
The problem is that we weren't a we. If we were a we would come together on the basis of what we have in common, and we would fight all of them. But that wasn't the case. And matter of fact, if you speak to God people, you know, God people will brag about, you know, Katamanso, that, yeah, we came together using what weapons? On behalf of whom? You understand? You have people who talk about, you know, oh, my ancestors collaborated with white people against these other black people because those other black people were bad people and so forth and so on. And meanwhile, you're taking prisoners of war. They're taking prisoners of war, and that's what they refer to as a quote-unquote gun slave cycle. That I'll give you guns on credit, I'll give him guns on credit, pay me back using his people. You too, pay me back using his people. And now the white man is laughing all the way to the bank because for the cost of just a few guns, he's going to get, you know, a ship worth, and matter of fact, the ship is going to be called the good ship Jesus, for anyone who is unaware. That's a historical thing, you can look it up. And you're going to have literally the equivalent of millions and millions of dollars of cargo in exchange for your prisoners of war who you don't see as the same people as you. You understand? So again, the problem is that the we wasn't a we. If we saw ourselves as we would do like how we did in classical Kemet. And then the other compounding factor is a lack of power. And that's a sense of, you know, gunpowder, you understand? Where they actually had a moratorium against selling either weapons or gunpowder to black people so that the black people can all be victimized. Now, this is the one you just signed a treaty with. This is your trading partner. This is your development partner. Meanwhile, he's part of a blanket ban on selling anything that's going to allow you as a black person to fight off any white person, including your own enemies, who, you know, is the enemy of that one too, supposedly. So, you know, again, that's what the Berlin Conference was all about, is that they were fighting amongst each other over who's going to control the land of black people. And literally, that's the only fight that they've ever had amongst each other, you understand? So if you even look at now, China, India, you know, building Confucius institutes and sending Gandhi statues, all of them are trying to project soft power for the exact same reason, because everyone on the planet knows that whosoever controls this land, which should be called Abibiman, the land of black people, but it's called Africa because Africa doesn't mean anything. You understand? Whoever controls this land is the one who runs the entire, that's the one who runs the entire planet Earth. So until we are aware that we're a we, one, and then until we are clear that we need to have power to defeat our enemies, we don't even know who our enemies are. Imagine you're in the dark and you know you have a gun, but you don't even know who or what your enemies are. You're as likely to shoot your brother as you are to shoot the armed robber who's come in. But if you're very clear on who your enemy is or who you are, you have the vision, maybe you turn on the light and you say, okay, now I know this guy doesn't come from the same ancestry and doesn't have the same descent as me. Let's get him out of the household. So this is the problem, is that there's a killer in the house. And we're doing inappropriate things on the basis of that. So imagine you have a killer in the house. You're like, you know what? I need to just mop up this blood from, I don't know why grandma's bleeding like that, but let me just mop up the blood. That's inappropriate behavior. You should do something about the killer in your house.
Find the killer.
You're washing dishes. You're saying, you know what? This is our problem. We're not clean enough. If we were clean enough, you know, then everything would be fine. And meanwhile, there's a killer in your house. You understand? And this is literally what we're doing. We're blaming ourselves. We're saying we're our own worst enemy. We're telling, yeah, you didn't clean that dish right. You didn't clean it right. But meanwhile, there's a killer in the house. And every time you see a Lebanese, every single time you see an Arab or an East Indian or a white, quote unquote, white person, whether from America or France Or, as Nana Omowale, who they call Malcolm X, would say, whether you have a French poodle, a German shepherd, or a Chihuahua, they're all dogs. Meanwhile, we have rabid dogs running through our houses, and we're doing inappropriate things of, oh, if only I blame you, and you're saying if only you blame me, now that's going to change something. It's not going to change anything, and this is why we're in the predicament that we're in right now. We're not willing to correctly identify our enemies, much less are we willing to build up the power to do something about those enemies. And until we do so, here we are.
This is so exciting, man. And ideally, we should be wrapping up right about now, which we will, and do a very, very short second part. But for now, let me just wrap up. But stay tuned, because I want to get into, we've talked about the past, we've talked about this and that. I want us to take a look at the present, right now. What is happening right now? Not the past, though. Where's our strength? Where's our unity? Where's our focus today in Africa? That's what we're going to be talking about when we come back in the next episode. Tune in on Thursday for the second part 2, Thursday. But for today, let me say, until I see you in the next episode, we are out of, let the whole world say, cheers.
The KSM Show.